Good morning, everyone. I am the Reverend Derwin Kostanak, priest at the Church of the Good Shepherd here in Calgary, and I would like to welcome you to our Sunday morning sermon this morning. It is the fifth Sunday in the season of Lent, and though we would love to be able to gather together and worship as one in one place, obviously we cannot do that these days, and so let me bring with you one of our readings today, along with some thoughts in a sermon about them. The readings today are Ezekiel chapter 37, Psalm 130, and John chapter 11. And in just a moment, I will read from the Gospel of John and afterwards proceed into the sermon. And so if you wish to pause the video and catch up on the other couple of readings first, feel free to do so. Otherwise, here we go with the Gospel of John. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with her perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." But when Jesus heard it, he said, "This illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it." Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, "Let us go to Judea again." The disciples said to him, "Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you, and are you going there again?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk during the day do not stumble because they see the light of the world. But those who walk at night stumble because the light is not in them." After saying this, he told them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to awaken him." The disciples said to him, "Lord, if he's fallen asleep, he will be all right." Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they thought that he was referring merely to sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. For your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us go also, that we may die with him." When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live, and everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus began to weep. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, Lord, already there is a stench because he has been dead for 4 days. Jesus said to her, Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upwards and said, Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said this, he cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out! The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, Unbind him and let him go. The Gospel of Christ. I find it interesting how it often works as we follow the lectionary, that the readings assigned for a particular Sunday so often end up being quite suitable for the circumstances that we often find ourselves in. Today, I think, is no exception. As we deal now with another week ahead of social distancing and trying to deal with this pandemic we're facing, I find it very encouraging that we have the readings that we have in the lectionary for today. If you've gone ahead and read them before, you'll know that Ezekiel chapter 37 is that famous passage of the valley of dry bones, where Ezekiel sees all these bones everywhere. There's no life there whatsoever. But then in his vision, he sees that God gives them new life. And this speaks, of course, to the raising up again of the nation of Israel, which had already been carried away into exile, for all intents and purposes having been eliminated altogether. The promise is it will be restored. New life will come. In the psalm, we see the psalmist basically calling out to God in a time of trouble. Psalm 130 begins with the words, Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. Lord, hear my voice. And it's a wonderful way of describing how we might feel in times like this. And then, of course, the gospel reading gives us this wonderful story of Jesus taking the man Lazarus who had been dead and bringing him to new life, resurrecting him to life once again. I don't know how many of you watching this video have had to be touched by someone who has fallen ill. Perhaps a family member or yourselves or a friend or someone you know has fallen ill with the COVID-19 virus, and they are, well, we don't know yet. Are they going to pull through? We hope so. We pray that they would. But of course, we know that as this disease has taken so many lives already, that might be part of the package. I trust that Ezekiel 37 and John 11 provide some comfort in seeing that awareness that God is one that can and does bring life where there is even no indication of life. And if that would be the case, then we can also count on seeing God do his work, even in times of sickness, to reverse that altogether. We pray also that God would continue to give wisdom and insight to the medical professionals who are treating these ones that we love, that we would see the wonderful blessing it is to have the medical knowledge that we do, and to see that continue to be exercised by those who are treating the ones that we love. In any event, these passages are encouraging. They give us hope, something to look forward to. And like Mary and Martha said to Jesus when he finally came to them, Lord, if you'd only been here, our brother would not have died. They aren't scolding Jesus by saying that. They aren't coming around and saying, Lord, what took you so long? If you'd only been here. No, really, they were actually quite faith-filled words. They knew that Jesus was the kind of person who could make something happen. That's why they sent for him in the first place. They just were disappointed. He didn't make it in time, and they had no idea of what he would do next. But that, of course, is part of the point of the story, isn't it? That here, people thought it was too late. People thought it was over, it was done and gone. And yet Jesus comes in and reverses altogether that which they thought had no opportunity for reversal. It's worth exploring that a little bit. Let's just consider the circumstance. Jesus has been in Jerusalem in the days before. He was encountering opposition again with the religious leaders of the day, the Pharisees and Sadducees, the ones who are generally referred to simply as the Jews in the Gospel of John. And the conflict was increasing, so much so that they were wanting to take his life. They tried to stone him. And so he and his disciples left Jerusalem. They went to the east side of the Jordan River, and got some distance away and just continued to minister there. That's where Jesus was when Martha and Mary sent word to him that Lazarus was ill. And so he was quite a ways away, about a day's journey out of town, when he gets the news. And what's interesting about this passage is that it tells us that when Jesus got the news that this friend of his, we don't know how Mary and Martha and Lazarus became friends of Jesus. We just simply know that they were friends. They had a relationship that was different from the relationship he had with his disciples and his apostles and for other people that he would reach out to in love. He had this friendship with them. We don't know how it happened, but nevertheless it was there. And so when the word came, we would expect that Jesus would have said, oh, my friend Lazarus is sick. I'm going to get over there right away and do something about that and help him out. But that's not what happens. What we read in the scripture actually is something that goes like this. When Jesus heard it, though he loved Martha and her sister Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, accordingly, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Another translation puts it as, so he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Meaning that the acknowledgement that he loved Mary and Martha and Lazarus was the reason why he waited. Now, another translation of the Bible puts the word yet in there instead, trying to acknowledge that there seems to be some tension here. We would have expected Jesus to rush over right away, and he didn't, so this seems to be incongruous, and so they put in the word yet to imply that there's something mystifying about this, but that's not really how the word goes. It really is so. It really is accordingly. It's because of his love for them that he did not go. Now, when we see that, we ask the question, why would Jesus have delayed? What's going on there? Well, there's a couple of things to look at here. First of all, we understand that when Jesus does go to see Mary and Martha, it has been 4 days. Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. We know that Jesus delayed for 2 days, and we also know that it would take a day to get to where Jesus was and for Jesus to get from there. So, Lazarus is ill. Mary and Martha send word. It'll take a day for the messengers to get out to where Jesus is. Jesus then waits 2 days and takes a day to come back. That's now 4 days in total, and sure enough, when he gets there, he's told that Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. What that means is that Lazarus was already dead before Jesus even heard that he was ill. And so perhaps the idea is that Jesus waited the 2 days because he already knew that Lazarus was dead. He was already aware that that was the case. He knew there was no need. And in fact, of course, he says that a little bit later on to his disciples. He tells them, Lazarus has fallen asleep. I'm going to go wake him up. They don't understand what he's saying. And he says, look, Lazarus is dead, okay? So he already knew. And so by the time he heard it, Mary and Martha had already experienced the death of their brother. And so for him, waiting sets up something that does create a wonderful picture for this family that he loves. Lazarus is already dead, but now by delaying, Jesus is going to show up when he's been dead for 4 days, which becomes a significant thing. We'll come back to that in a minute. But there's also another thing to consider here. What was Jesus and his disciples doing when they were on the east side of the Jordan? Oftentimes when we read the passage and see that they delayed 2 days before leaving, we sometimes get the idea that they were just hanging out or something. They're just lounging around, having a good time, whatever. That doesn't seem to make much sense. All the time in the Gospels, when we read that Jesus is out doing things, unless he has deliberately gone on a retreat with his disciples to get some space and some refreshment, he's always serving others. He's over in this area where there would have been other people. There would have been people bringing their sick to him. There would have been people bringing their concerns to him. And so what we see in all likelihood Jesus doing in this 2 days that he waits is he is actually ministering to the people who are right there in front of him. And rather than saying, oh, sorry guys, I know you're all here. I got to go because I have a really good friend of mine and I got to go heal him. So I'm just going to leave you all behind. I think what's really going on is Jesus is still taking a couple more days to continue to minister to people who are right there in front of him, to continue to show mercy and grace and love and compassion to them. And he's not just bailing out on them because Lazarus is sick. Jesus, of course, knows what he's capable of doing, even though the others don't realize that. And that, of course, is where the story goes. So, having looked at those possibilities, I hope we can see that it's not a huge problem that Jesus waits, and that we can even see a connection in his delay precisely because of his love for Mary and Martha and Lazarus, especially in light of how we know the story goes. But let's continue the story at this point, because this is bringing us to the point I do want to get to. Jesus makes his way towards Bethany, this little town just a short distance out of Jerusalem. Of course, the disciples are concerned because he's going back towards the same place where people had tried to kill him before. But nevertheless, he says, I got to go. Now's the time to make it happen. Martha comes out to greet him. And as we've discussed, she says, if you'd only been here, my brother would not be dead. You would have saved him. So she's expressing this faith. And then when she tells Mary that Jesus is coming, Mary comes out, says the exact same thing, again, expressing faith. They're not going and trying to be critical of Jesus. They know that Jesus would have done something. That's why they asked for him. But they don't have a category for what would happen now. I said earlier that they make much mention that Lazarus was dead for 4 days. It comes up a couple of times in the passage at least. And the reason that's significant is for, well, two things in particular. The first one is that in that ancient Jewish culture, the idea was that when a person died, their soul or their spirit might come back and reanimate the body, might actually come back to the body it loves and longs for. And so the practice was that when a person died, they would be have their body embalmed, or, well, not embalmed, but would have it wrapped up and treated and ready for burial. But someone would always stay with the body for up to 3 days, just in case the spirit would return. But the understanding is that by the time you come to the 4th day, the spirit would see the body and see its pallor and see its decay and this kind of thing, and then avoid it altogether. So by the time you got to day 4, if nothing changed, you could count on the person being dead. This practice is actually kind of similar to the European practice of a wake, something that I understand is still pretty popular in the British Isles these days. And the origin of the wake actually comes, as I understand it, from the time of the Black Death, from the plague back in the Middle Ages. And people were dying left, right, and center, so much so that oftentimes people made a rather hasty assumption about someone who had passed out and was lying in the gutter. Maybe the person was drunk, or maybe they were really sick or fatigued or exhausted or whatever, but people would see them lying there, assume they were dead, and go and begin to take the steps to bury them, and perhaps even while they were pouring the dirt upon their coffin, would suddenly notice that there was some noise and realize the person actually wasn't dead. And so in order to avoid such a tragedy, they began the practice of holding what was called a wake. The body would be put on a table in a room, and then people would come, family and friends. They'd have this wild, well, maybe not wild, but a loud party. They would celebrate. They would be noisy. This would carry on for a duration of time. The idea being that they thought if they partied loud enough, they might wake the person who was lying there. And if the person was really not dead, they're trusting that this would be proven by them coming to consciousness because of this party. And so it became known as a wake. Something kind of similar to what happened in ancient Israel. So with Lazarus being dead for 4 days, though, that means they understood that his spirit had not returned. He was really dead. And of course, the second significant part is when Jesus tells Martha to roll the stone away, she says, but wait, there's going to be a stench. He's been dead for 4 days. There was already an awareness, of course, that decay would begin, that there would be a problem here. Like Lazarus was not alive, and in fact, his body was already decomposing. So for those 4 days to elapse, and for Jesus to then resurrect Lazarus at this point, is something absolutely remarkable that had not been seen before. Even in the instances where Jesus had brought someone back to life, their death had happened much more recently, perhaps within the same day. There had not been this notion of the spirit not returning to the body. There had been no opportunity for decay. And so Jesus reviving somebody who was recently deceased is of one category of thing, still rather miraculous. Let's not miss that point. But here with Lazarus, because it was 4 days, this was huge that he was doing. Another indicator why we can see that his love for Mary and Martha and Lazarus allowed them to see the glory of God revealed through Jesus's actions for them in such a wonderful and dramatic and amazing way. And people began to come around to see this man who had been dead and was now alive. We learn about that afterwards. So those are the circumstances we see. But there is one other thing I still want to get to in this passage that I think is of vital importance for us to understand. The Gospel of John is full of miraculous accounts of things Jesus did. The I am statements he made. He made one of them in this passage here. I am the resurrection and the life, he says. We see these amazing things that Jesus did, and we understand, of course, from the latter chapter of the book that the gospel writer was intending this to be done so that people might believe in Jesus. And so when you write a book with that intention, it makes sense that you would bring out the highlights. You would bring out these wonderful works of power, these amazing things that Jesus did. But there's something else in this account that's included that is really curious. It's not something that you would add unless it happened. And you wouldn't bring it up unless there was something else to learn about that. And that is Jesus's response after Mary goes out to meet him. She was in the house with a bunch of friends who were helping her mourn, just simply being present. And they thought she was going to go to the tomb to mourn there, but they go to be there with Jesus when she's talking with Jesus. And she again says, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And then we read these words. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. That's a very interesting description of Jesus. Other passages, their translations rather, will say things he was very agitated, things like that. You could take that language there and actually translate it that Jesus became quite angry even, that this is how visceral his response was. In fact, this statement here in the entire Old Testament is arguably the most descriptive passage anywhere of Jesus's emotion. Like, he is most vividly, perhaps even more so than when he was clearing out the money changers from the temple. There is something very full going on here with Jesus, even angry. We have to ask ourselves the question, what's going on there? What's happening? Some people think that the reason Jesus might be even angry at this point is he is upset that all these people are weeping and carrying on and wailing, and they don't believe that he can do something about it. That doesn't fit Jesus's character. That doesn't make sense. What I think instead we see is that Jesus is looking around at the mourning, the pain, the experience of this loss that is being demonstrated so clearly in Mary and in her friends, that Jesus is angry at the fact that Lazarus died. I mean, Jesus knew Lazarus had died. Jesus knew what he was going to be doing in just a minute, right? But nevertheless, as he looks at these people that he loves and cares for and sees the depth of pain that they're experiencing, he feels it. He gets it. This is one of the things that we always have to keep in mind about the incarnation, that in the divine one becoming human, the book of Hebrews says that Jesus learned things by having become human. And I think here we see something else. Jesus knows what it is to actually feel that. And he's angry at it. The book of Revelation will give us the wonderful promise that at the end of all things, God will wipe away every tear. There will no longer be mourning or death or crying or pain because the old order of things has been taken away. This is something that God is looking forward to doing. It is something that Jesus is going to promise us. But right now, at this moment, he's seeing it, experiencing it. He's getting it firsthand, if you will. And so he has this response. Then he says to them, "Where have you laid him?" So they said to him, "Lord, come and see." And then verse 35, Jesus began to weep. The King James Version simply puts it, Jesus wept. The shortest verse in the Bible. He weeps. This weeping is not the kind of loud wailing that you would expect that the friends of Mary and Martha would be doing. Even today on the news, when you see a funeral procession in the Middle East context, you'll often see, of course, tremendous outpouring of expression of grief. in North America, we tend to try to keep it bottled up. So here, those with Mary and Martha would be wailing and would be expressing that grief. But that's not what Jesus is doing here. But he is weeping. He is shedding tears. Jesus burst into tears, another translation says. There was this response. And what we see right here now in this piece is that Jesus is fully experiencing the grief and pain and loss that human beings experience when loved ones are lost. They say to some of the Jews, see Jesus, and they say, see how he loved him. Well, it's not likely that Jesus was weeping over the loss of Lazarus, but instead in response to the pain of what Mary and Martha are experiencing. And this is the vital piece to grasp this morning. Jesus knows that in a minute, he's going to raise Lazarus from the dead. Jesus has already told his disciples, Lazarus is dead, but I'm going to bring him back to life. Lazarus is asleep, but I'm going to go wake him up. He already knows what he's going to do. And yet he still weeps. He is right there in the midst of the grief that Mary and Martha are experiencing. Why would you put this into a gospel that is highlighting the most miraculous and powerful things that Jesus is doing? You'd put it in there if it happened, and if it adds something that is absolutely essential for us to grasp ourselves. I think if I was in Jesus's position, already knowing that I was going to raise Lazarus from the dead, and I came in and saw everybody crying and in pain, I would say, hey, don't worry, it's okay, I'm here. I know you wish I got here sooner, but I'm here now, and just wait, let me show you there's no reason for you to cry. Lazarus, come forth. Ta-da, here's your brother. See, isn't that wonderful? I think that's the way I would do it. But Jesus didn't do it that way. Instead, he was with them in their grief. He was present with them in the midst of the pain they were feeling. He felt it with them too. And this morning, I want you to know that no matter what happens, I don't know if you have a loved one who has contracted COVID-19 or if you yourself are dealing with it right now. I have no idea what the future will hold for you or me or anybody else. But no matter what, we need to know that Jesus is right there with us in the midst of it. He is sharing the pain with us. He is experiencing the pain with us. He knows what it's like. He's been there, done that. He is right alongside us. And he's not telling us just to have faith and just, oh, put those tears away. Don't worry, I'm here. I'll take care of you. Just stop crying. No. He's happy for us to look to Psalm 130. Out of the depths, I cry to you, O Lord. Lord, hear my voice. He knows what that feels like. He's always right there with us in it all. So this morning, be encouraged in that way. I'm not going to suggest to you that you ought to wipe the tears from your eyes if right now you are feeling the pain and loss and the circumstances all around us making life difficult. No, not at all. I want you to know that Jesus is with you. He'll never leave you or forsake you. And we look forward to and we pray and we ask that we would see him do something in the circumstances you're facing. But no matter what, know that he is there. Always. You can count on it. Amen.